I never planned to follow my husband to Cleveland. In our 12 years of marriage, I'd never checked Richard's phone or questioned his whereabouts. Trust was our foundation, or so I believed. But there I was, sitting in a rental car, outside a charming colonial-style house in a Cleveland suburb, watching raindrops distort the golden light spilling from windows that framed a life I knew nothing about. It started with a misplaced boarding pass. Richard had left for a 2-day conference in Cleveland, one of dozens of business trips he took each year as a management consultant. While cleaning his office, I found a boarding pass tucked into a book, One Way to Cleveland, dated 6 months earlier. I might have dismissed it if not for the date. 6 months ago, Richard had told me he was in Seattle. I remembered clearly because it was our anniversary, and we'd celebrated the weekend before. He'd sent flowers from Seattle on the actual day. That discrepancy might have remained just a curious anomaly, if not for what happened next. Richard called that evening from his Cleveland hotel. "How's the conference?" I asked, phone pressed between ear and shoulder as I prepared dinner. "Great, the usual corporate stuff. How's everything there?" "Fine. Hey, have you been to Cleveland recently?" I found an old boarding pass. The silence that followed lasted only seconds, but in those seconds, our marriage tilted on its axis. Yeah. Quick client meeting a few months back." His voice had the slightly higher pitch it took on when he was lying. This felt different from his small, harmless lies over the years. "Was that during our anniversary when you were in Seattle?" Another pause. No, different trip. "Listen, I've got to run dinner with the team. Love you." He hung up before I could respond. I stood in our kitchen, wooden spoon dripping tomato sauce onto the floor, feeling something dark and cold unfurl in my chest. That night, I logged into our credit card account and searched for charges from 6 months ago. There were several from Cleveland, spanning the entire week he was supposedly in Seattle. Restaurant charges for 2, a jewelry store, and most puzzlingly, a recurring monthly charge to an address in Shaker Heights that had begun 2 years ago. The next morning, I took emergency leave from work. I told Richard I was visiting my sister in New York, another lie to add to whatever web we were now weaving. Then I booked a flight to Cleveland, which is how I found myself sitting outside this house on a rainy Tuesday evening. I had imagined many scenarios during the flight. Perhaps it was an investment property. Maybe a relative I'd never met needed financial support. I even considered an affair. Women discovered such things every day and somehow survived. What I hadn't prepared for was what emerged as the front door opened. A boy, perhaps 9 or 10, dashed out to retrieve something from a minivan. He had Richard's distinctive gait. Behind him in the doorway stood Richard, my husband, dressed in jeans and a sweatshirt I'd never seen before. He called to the boy, who turned, and in profile, I saw my husband's face transposed onto a smaller form. My stomach lurched. Not just an affair, a child, a son. As I watched, a woman appeared beside Richard. She was pretty in a subtle way, with dark hair pulled into a ponytail. Richard's arms slipped around her waist with the easy familiarity of long intimacy. A perfectly ordinary family tableau, except that the man was my husband. I don't remember driving to my hotel. My next clear memory is sitting on the bed, scrolling through years of photos Richard and me hiking in Vermont at my parents' anniversary party, building a snowman outside our home. Had all of it been a lie? I didn't confront him that night. Instead, I investigated. I drove back to the house the following morning and watched as Richard emerged in a different one than he'd packed for this business trip, kissed the woman goodbye, and drove away in a car I didn't recognize, a car he kept here in this other life. After he left, I approached the house. My hands were shaking as I pressed the doorbell. The door opened, and there she stood. She wore simple jeans and a blouse, and a delicate necklace with a small diamond pendant caught the morning light. With a jolt, I recognized the pendant was identical to one Richard had given me, claiming it was one of a kind. "Can I help you?" she asked, her smile polite but questioning. My voice failed. "I'm Richard Garrett's wife." Her smile didn't falter, which was somehow more devastating than any shock would have been. "I know," she said simply. "You're Natalie. I've seen photos. I think you'd better come in." Her name was Emily. She'd met Richard 11 years ago, 1 year after our wedding. She knew about me from the beginning. He had told her he was in an unhappy marriage, but staying for complicated financial reasons. He promised her that eventually he would leave me. "I never meant to be the other woman," she said, pouring coffee at her kitchen table. Richard had apparently helped choose, but by the time I realized he wasn't being honest about leaving his marriage, I was pregnant with Carter, the boy I'd seen, 10 years old, born while Richard and I were trying unsuccessfully to conceive. The fertility treatments, the disappointments, the grief we'd supposedly shared all while he fathered a child with another woman. "Does he have any other families I should know about?" I asked, bitter humor bubbling up through the shock. Emily didn't smile. "Not that I know of. But then, I never knew when he was really with you and when he was somewhere else entirely." I stayed in Cleveland for 5 days, never confronting Richard directly. Instead, I texted that my visit with my sister was being extended, mirroring his own deceptions. Meanwhile, Emily and I talked for hours, piecing together the elaborate architecture of lies he'd constructed. He traveled for work roughly 15 days each month, divided almost evenly between his life with me and his life with them. He kept separate phones, separate credit cards, even separate clothing styles for each home. With me, he was Richard, the ambitious consultant, always in tailored suits. With them, he was Rich, the devoted family man, in comfortable sweaters and jeans. How did he keep it all straight? I wondered aloud. "He has a system," she said, showing me a hidden app on her phone, a detailed calendar tracking his schedule between his 2 lives, coded so it wouldn't raise suspicions if discovered. The level of premeditation was breathtaking. This wasn't a man who had slipped into deception. This was calculated architecture, and the foundation had been laid 12 years ago, on the day he'd vowed to forsake all others. Carter was at school during most of my visits, but on the 5th day, he came home early for a dentist appointment. "This is my friend Natalie," Emily said carefully, not revealing my true identity yet. He had Richard's eyes and the same cowlick that never lay flat. He showed me his science project, a model of the solar system, and mentioned that his dad had helped him paint Jupiter, my husband, painting planets on his secret son's school project, while telling me he was negotiating contracts in Denver. That night, I called Richard. "I'm coming home tomorrow," I said. "Great, I just got back from Cleveland myself. How's your sister?" The ease with which he lied still stunned me. "She's fine, Richard. When I get home, we need to talk." "Everything okay?" "No," I said simply. "No, it's not." I flew home to Boston the next day. Our house felt like a film set now, a carefully constructed facade. Richard arrived home at his usual time, calling out my name with the same affectionate inflection he'd always used. "We need to talk," I said, sitting at our dining table. He sat across from me, concern creasing his brow. What's going on, Nat? I know about Cleveland, I said. I know about Emily and Carter. The transformation of his expression was devastating. The flicker of shock, the momentary calculation, and finally a strange relief, as if some part of him had been waiting for this moment. How? He asked, barely audible. Does it matter? I was there, Richard. I saw your house, met your ... other family. I've spent the past week with Emily, comparing notes on our shared husband. When he spoke again, the man I knew seemed to have vanished entirely. So what happens now? Not an apology, not an explanation, just a strategic question, the response of someone already calculating his next move. Now, I echoed. Now I file for divorce. Now you face the consequences of maintaining two separate lives for over a decade. It wasn't supposed to be like this, he said. I never meant to hurt anyone. The absurdity of that statement hung between us. He had orchestrated the most intimate betrayal possible, sustained it for years, and brought a child into the deception. How did you think this would end, Richard? He shook his head. I don't know. I just ... kept going. Each year it got easier to maintain, harder to imagine stopping. I convinced myself no one was getting hurt as long as no one knew. The clinical detachment in his voice chilled me. This wasn't a man overwhelmed by passion or caught in circumstances beyond his control. This was someone who had made thousands of consecutive choices to deceive the people who loved him most. Do you love them? I asked. Yes, he said, without hesitation. Then, meeting my eyes, I love you too. I always have. That's not love, I replied, suddenly bone-weary. Love doesn't do this. The weeks that followed were a blur of lawyers, financial disclosures, and sleepless nights. Richard moved out immediately. Emily and I continued to talk, an unlikely alliance born of shared betrayal. She was filing for full custody of Carter, a process complicated by the fact that Richard had never been listed as his father on the birth certificate, another calculated deception. 6 months later, I sat across from Richard in a mediator's office, finalizing our divorce. He looked older, as if the strain of maintaining his double life had suddenly caught up with him. I'm moving to Cleveland, he said. Emily's letting me see Carter, supervised visits for now. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Part of me had hoped his other family would reject him too, leaving him truly alone with the consequences of his actions. But there was a child involved. A boy who deserved whatever stable relationship might be salvaged from this wreckage. 2 years later, Emily texted me. Richard had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, advanced and aggressive. He had only months to live. After days of consideration, I flew to Cleveland one last time, not for Richard, but for myself, to face the author of my greatest pain and find whatever closure might be possible. He was in hospice by then, his once robust frame diminished. Carter, now 12, was introduced to me simply as someone who knew your dad a long time ago. Richard and I spoke alone for nearly an hour. There were no dramatic revelations, just quiet conversation between two people connected only by shared history and regret. I've thought so much about what I would say if I ever saw you again, I told him. All the questions I still had, but now that I'm here, none of it seems important. He nodded weakly. The older you get, the more you realize how little most things matter in the end. Except the people you've hurt that matters. He died 6 weeks later. I didn't attend the memorial service. Instead, I walked along the beach near my new home, thinking about the journey that had brought me here from blind trust through devastating betrayal to a kind of peace I hadn't thought possible in those early days of discovery. The business trip that changed everything had ultimately changed me most of all. It had taught me about resilience, about rebuilding, about the capacity to survive what once seemed unsurvivable. It had shown me that even the most elaborate deceptions eventually crumble, revealing harder but more honest truths beneath. The secret family I had discovered was no longer the defining story of my life. It was simply a chapter 1 that had ended, making way for new pages to be written in my own hand, without deception, without the shadow of a double life darkening every joy. And in that, despite everything, I had found freedom.